Junko Furuta was a vibrant, hard-working 16-year-old girl in Misato, Japan. Known for her kindness, she was a diligent student at Yashio Minami High School with dreams of a bright future. She wasn't involved in gangs or dangerous activities. She was simply focused on living a peaceful, fulfilling life. Tragically, in November 1988, her life took a horrifying turn, one that would shock the entire nation. On a cold November evening, Junko was riding her bike home from her part-time job at a local electronics store. She had no idea that Hiroshi Miyano, an 18-year-old with a history of petty crime, was watching her. Miyano, alongside his friend Nobuharu Minato, saw Junko cycling alone. Miyano, in an effort to impress his friend and assert his dominance, instructed Minato to push Junko off her bike. After that, Miyano offered to walk home. Instead, he led her to an abandoned warehouse. There, Miyano started assaulting her. He also beat her. Then he told her that he had Yakuza connections. Miyano continued threatening to unlive her family if she ever tries to report him. From the abandoned warehouse, Miyano then took her to a hotel. There, Minato, Joe Ogura, and Yasushi Watanabe were waiting. They all took turns assaulting her. And this was not their first time. They had done the same to another girl just before. After spending some time at the hotel, they took Junko to Minato's parents' house, where they kept her for 41 days. Meanwhile, that evening, Junko's mother reported the missing of her daughter after 3 days of attempting to find her. Police intervened and worked with her to find her daughter. The captors made Junko call her parents, and they forced her to say that she ran away and so they did not need to look for her. Sadly, Minato's family knew a girl was in the house, but they didn't intervene. As they knew Minato's reputation, they didn't want to anger him or his Yakuza friends. For the entire time, Minato's brother and parents stayed silent, and the abuse continued. Junko was severely beaten. She was dehydrated, vomiting, and weak. Hence, the boys beat her for vomiting. They forced her to drink water, milk, and even her own urine. They made her eat live cockroaches. They forced her to be naked most of the time and put her in a freezer. Sometimes, she had to sleep outside on the balcony under their surveillance. During this time, the cold weather made her conditions worse. After 20 days, Junko couldn't walk anymore. But the boys didn't stop. They used lighter fluid to burn her legs. Someone should ask, what did she do for all of that? They again set her on fire, they crushed her hands with dumbbells, and they tortured her in other horrible ways. One night, the boys got drunk. Junko tried to escape. She crawled downstairs and tried to call the police, but Miyano found her. He took the phone and lied to the police, saying that it was the wrong number. The boys charged their anger and burned her again. They put her head on concrete and stomped on it. After a while, the heartless boys lost interest. They no longer found her attractive. So they used the same plan on another girl, who was 19 years old at the time. These evil guys hung Junko from the ceiling fan while fully naked. Then they started using her as a punching bag. They forced her to perform humiliating acts. They shoved objects into her body. On January 4th, 1989, Minato and the others were very angry because they had lost at Mahjong. Then they beat Junko for 2 hours and burned her again. And then she went into a complete shock. She passed the next day. Minato's brother called him about Junko's death, and the bad boys quickly arranged to dispose her body. They put her in a 55-gallon oil drum, and they filled it with concrete. Now guess what? They went to dump the drum at a construction site in Kodo. Meanwhile, the police were investigating an assault case of a 19-year-old girl. Hiroshi got confused. He thought they were talking about Junko. He thought the other boys had told the police about her. So he confessed to the police and told them where Junko's body was. The police identified Junko's body by her fingerprints, though her face was too damaged. Sadly, the autopsy revealed that she was pregnant, and Junko's mother fainted when she heard the news. They rushed to a psychiatric hospital. You know what made it so frustrating? The police didn't release the boys' names to the public because they were minors. But out of the blue, a magazine called Shukan Bunshun leaked their names. That magazine called them inhuman and said they didn't deserve human rights. The public was furious, as the boys were going to be tried as juveniles. But because of the outrage, they were tried as adults and received light sentences. They were not charged with murder. They were only charged with causing bodily injury that resulted in death. Can you imagine? Among them, Hiroshi received 17 years in prison. Later, his sentence was increased to 20 years. Then Minato got 5 to 7 years and Watanabe got 9 years while Joe received 8 years. After they were released, Minato changed his name to Shinji. Later, he was arrested again for attempting to murder a businessman. Joe also changed his name. He became Joe Kamisaku. He repeatedly bragged about the murder, but his father felt ashamed. He said he would give all his savings to Junko's family, but Joe took the money for himself. Contrarily, Joe's mother blamed Junko for ruining her son's life. She even vandalized Junko's tombstone. The public reaction to Junko Furuta's murder was one of widespread outrage, particularly when the details of her abuse became known. The Japanese public, already sensitized to the issue of juvenile delinquency, was horrified that such a brutal crime could be committed by minors. In response to this public outcry, there were calls for stricter laws regarding juvenile offenders and more stringent penalties for violent crimes committed by young people. The fact that the boys involved were sentenced as minors, despite the extreme brutality of their actions, led to debates about the fairness of Japan's juvenile justice system. The media played a significant role in amplifying the outrage surrounding the case. When the magazine Shukan Bunshun leaked the names of the perpetrators, it became clear that the public was not willing to let the case fade into obscurity. The outcry was so intense that the Japanese justice system had to respond by prosecuting the boys as adults. However, despite the increased scrutiny and public pressure, the sentences the boys received were still seen by many as insufficient for the magnitude of the crime they had committed. Even after their release, the boys' continued criminal behavior raised questions about whether the justice system had done enough to rehabilitate them. The fact that Shinji, Minato, attempted to murder another person and that Joe Kamisaku boasted about his involvement in Junko's murder suggested that their time in prison had done little to change their violent tendencies. Junko Furuta's story remains a haunting reminder of the darkest depths of human cruelty. Her life was stolen by a group of young men who tortured, raped, and murdered her without any semblance of remorse or human decency. Her tragic death has become a symbol of the consequences of unchecked violence and the failures of a justice system that failed to properly address the crimes of the young perpetrators. In the years following her death, Junko's name has continued to be remembered. Her case has sparked debates about juvenile justice, the treatment of victims of violence, and the rehabilitation of offenders. Yet, despite the passage of time, the pain and suffering endured by Junko and her family remain a testament to the enduring need for a society that prioritizes justice, accountability, and the protection of its most vulnerable members. Junko Furuta's story is not just one of unimaginable suffering, it is a call to action. It is a reminder that society must confront the deepest injustices and work tirelessly to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected. It is also a warning that those who commit heinous acts, regardless of their age, must be held accountable for their actions, and that their victims should never be forgotten